Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast, and we're here with our 150th episode, and we've decided to meet up in person in Stockport. Myself, I'm John Potter, I'm hosting the Lib Dem Podcast, but around the table we have...
Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham Liberal Democrats.
I'm Lisa Smart, welcome to Marple.
I'm Hannah Kitching, leader of Barnsley Liberal Democrats.
I'm Tom Morrison, parliamentary candidate in Cheadle.
So, obviously we were planning this episode, we were thinking, right, end of the year, it's middle of December, nothing much is going to happen, and then we have a by-election. So if we happen to have a spectacular result in North Shropshire, we will do an update episode, okay. So for this one, we're having a night out, we're going to enjoy ourselves, but we're also going to review the year. What kind of year it's been, how are the Lib Dems feeling at the moment, how are the Tories feeling at the moment. So, okay, let's start with you, Lisa, because you have obviously been selected now. You are ready for the next fight. So for you, what has been your lasting memory of this year?
I think coming out of local elections, where we were kind of net neutral, really, we were slightly positive, but there were some really good stories, there were some less good stories, given where we were with the vaccine programme and all of that kind of stuff. And to come out of that and to win Cheshire and Amersham, I think as a Liberal Democrat, if Cheshire and Amersham isn't on your list of top high points of the year, then you've not been paying attention. I think there is a genuine opportunity to have a bipolar, I don't know if that's the right way, two-peaked year with Chesham and with North Shropshire. Because polling day is next Thursday, we're recording this on Saturday evening, and we're off there tomorrow to do a bit of door knocking, talk to some Tories, or I've always voted Tory but people, who I found loads of last time, but it's got to be Chesham for me, high point of the year, getting the wonderful Sarah Green elected. Is
that for everyone? It's difficult to say really anything other than Cheshire and Amersham because it's such a high point. But
well, I was also re-elected, so on a personal level, I continue to be a councillor in Stockport, getting me re-elected. Yeah. Quite right.
So do we think the Lib Dems are in a good place? Me and Hannah, obviously, we spent time obviously in the Batley and Spen by-election, where obviously was important for another way because we needed to shut up some of the Progressive Alliance people. I don't think we shouldn't the nonsense that we had to put up with that. And Tom Gordon did such a wonderful job in keeping that flame alive. And I think that's been part of the struggle today, because I think this year everyone said, well, the Tories are so bad, surely you and Labour should just merge or something like that. And that's been one of the big fights of this year, probably.
Yeah, and unfortunately, John, it's not over. It hasn't stopped. I'm seeing quite a lot of nonsense coming out of North Shropshire Labour, quoting the 2019 general election, saying they're the main contenders. And I think it's hard to tell, isn't it, to what extent that's just a local party feeling ticked off at feeling sidelined, which, we've all been there, haven't we? I think we can understand that. And to what extent it is a demonstration that Labour would just really prefer the Tories won all the time, rather than us. But I think on the whole, I think it's just been a really good year for campaigning. We had the general election in 2019, and then really for the whole of 2020, we had nothing. And, for those of us that have flown from one by-election, council by-election, council elections, parliamentary by-elections, general election, to some extent actually I really quite enjoyed a year off. It wasn't unpleasant to not be continuously fighting elections, but we're back in it now, and I think having that constant buzz of the local elections and then Cheshire and Amersham and then Batley and Spen, which I thoroughly enjoyed from a campaigning point of view, and then
although I got really badly sunburnt in Yorkshire, which was horrendous. Obviously we met up and I blame you.
Yes.
I do blame you, because you said, it's an easy patch, don't worry about this. 3 hours later.
Well, I had my SPF 50 on, John. I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for your own sun care, am I?
Okay, that's a fair point. Well, yeah.
So, and then we've just had a by-election in Rotherham. I'm going to get that in.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was Thursday night. So that was the seat in Rotherham. So Rotherham electing all ups. So only elections every 4 years. Obviously, it had been 5 years since the last set of Rotherham elections, and we made 3 gains, but then Drew Tarney just missed out by 15 votes. So he was, really up for that. They'd been keeping an eye on this Tory councillor who had basically not turned up to a single meeting after annual council. They thought she was going to time out, but actually she resigned. So they were straight into that in the Rotherham team, and won that by a pretty convincing 350 odd votes on Thursday night.
And are we thinking there's a bit of a sea change? I mean, we can talk about the mess the Tories are in a little bit later, but I just want to.
I think we would enjoy that.
But I want to kind of assess whether the Lib Dems are, because I don't think there's any way. I don't think we should hide the fact in the northwest. I think the election results were mixed. I think I lost 2 really good councillors from my group, and I think me and Hannah both had private chats about I was in a bit of a slump after May. Thinking,
I was.
Yeah, and it's just like, but I feel like there's something happening right now, and you can see it in areas, like you just said in Rotherham. I want to give a shout out to Team Morecambe in Lancashire, who have had 6 by-elections in the space of basically a month and a half, and have won 4, made 4 gains. And I just feel like the Lib Dems, I feel like they've got a bit of energy back in. Is that what you're feeling, Sam?
It feels really specific. One of you shouted out about Morecambe, Sunderland as well as another example of. There are teams doing great work, and I feel like there are opportunities more than it's necessarily like an even thing across the Liberal Democrats. There are teams out there showing exactly what you can deliver, and the sort of by-election result in Cheshire and Ambershire and what's happening in North Shropshire. Again, there's so much potential there. I still feel there's a lot of places where like we lost so much infrastructure that there are people who just feel sort of overly isolated. They don't quite know how to get to making those results, and that's why I think Morecambe is actually really important, because they didn't have that infrastructure.
And it was Labour and Tory facing Morecambe. This is the thing. So they took. So I mean, I'm particularly, and we're talking about dealing with disappointment. The Morecambe chap, Paul, who's absolutely worked his socks off, missed out on the county seat by 3 votes. By 3 votes. And they've just pulled the socks up and went, you know what? We're just going to keep on winning. So they've taken out a Tory in like the rural sticks, they're taking on Labour in the urban sticks, all of which have been taken for granted. And I just, it's really energised me, actually.
But I think that's what we're best at, John. Particularly in the north of England, you know, we know that kind of nationally the focus is on, you know, these Tory-facing seats. But actually, I think we are really good at switching from both sides. You know, that's how I won my council seat. That's how we win in Barnsley, because we, you know, when you've not really stood in previous years, you don't have a squeeze message. We give people a reason to vote for us, which is, you know, we're neither of the above, and I do think we have a unique appeal, and I think we are at our strongest when we try to switch from both sides. I'm a big fan of a switch campaign.
Yeah. What about you, Tom? How are you feeling at the moment?
I think it's. I think we're seeing this is the year of the ground war. I think this is what we've shown in Cheshire and Amersham, what we've seen. Morecambe is a really good example of it. What we saw in the by-election in Rotherham is actually while the Conservatives are in a complete mess, and also Labour are probably not doing as well as like their supporters would want them to be, because people are kind of going, they're not listening to us. But what we're doing is our teams are going out knocking on the door saying what's the matter, and then they'll say it's either this street or it's the local schools or something. We're campaigning on that. And actually what it's this is bread and butter stuff for us, and it's playing to us. Community politics. And Sam's absolutely right. We're probably not seeing it in the polls, but it's massive opportunities, and it's about taking those opportunities.
Is this a little bit of a what's the reverse of a perfect storm? I don't know what that is, but the fact is that the Tories are kind of imploding a little bit under the incompetence of a cabinet that doesn't know what they're doing, based on a Labour Party that also doesn't know who they are in terms of, you see, I mean, even now, even though they're doing well in the polls, some people are still saying, well, Corbyn would have been even further in front.
They're wrong.
Yeah, they are.
So I think Labour So after a general election, all parties take time to assess where they're up to, clear out some of the problems that they were storing up, and we're no different to that. Labour just had more problems and bigger issues to deal with, and they've taken a while to get there. I think it's clear that they are making progress away from where they were. They still have a distance to travel, but the recent reshuffle showed that they've got some people who can string a sentence together in the media, where 2 years ago they did not have a lot of those to go around. You've got people who, I disagree with her on home affairs issues quite strongly. She is not a Liberal, but Yvette Cooper can make a compelling case.
But she didn't do it. Sorry, there's a thing about Yvette Cooper. I want to get this off my chest. This is the first rant that you can tell I've had. This is my second drink.
Go for it, mate.
Yeah. Yvette Cooper, people tend to think, very highly of. She was Theresa May's shadow when Theresa May was doing all sorts of shocking things and never laid a glove on her. I'm just saying, there's a lot of chat about, because they're not rubbish Corbynistas, are this Labour group brilliant?
So she is a competent media performer,
Yeah.
deeply authoritarian, and as Liberal Democrats we should oppose almost everything she comes out with. That doesn't mean she's not a competent media performer. She's not actually quite bright. She just comes to different conclusions about how to make the world a better
She's
place.
better than
we
Diane
do.
Abbott.
Quite a long way away from our values and the things we hold dear, locking people up, not letting people in the country at all, regardless of their family ties, anything about their background, their history, what they're going to add to our country. We agree strongly with Yvette Cooper on some things. We disagree even more strongly on lots of things around crime, justice, home affairs issues.
Where are Labour going to be at the next general election? I don't see them going forward, because it's weird, because all of us here, I think, have Labour-facing councils as part of it. I mean, I have a Tory-facing council as well, because I'm a dual-hatted councillor, and you guys have Tory-facing MPs, but I think Labour seems stuck.
Hannah just snatched the mic
Yeah, I
off
did.
me.
So, no, it's not that big rant. So there's a question for me about, are Labour doing better? Or is it just that the Tories are doing so badly? And so, therefore they're getting this reflection. Because I think, we can all agree, the May local elections were really hard for all of us because of that surge in that Tory vote. And what we said, kind of locally and regionally, and nationally to some extent, was this feels like high tide for the Tories.
It does.
This feels like high tide. And thank goodness for that. We could not have seen that Tory surge get any higher. And I think, to some extent, when you look at the polls, and it frustrates us, doesn't it? Because clearly we think actually we're the better alternative to either Labour or the Tories. But as that Tory opinion poll comes down, the Labour opinion poll comes up. Yeah. And so, there is a question for me around, are Labour doing better? Keir is slowly cranking up through those gears at PMQs,
He's
isn't he?
gone from vanilla to French vanilla.
Yes, French vanilla. That's a really good way to describe it. And yes, the cabinet reshuffle I think was a good idea. I think Keir felt there needed to be a bit of pandering to the Corbynistas for a couple of years. Now he's perhaps moving towards the cabinet he wants. But I do feel that they're not really upping their game so much as the Tories are just in an absolute mess.
And I think the Tories are not just having to look at Labour. So having knocked on doors, we're going to talk about North Shropshire quite a few times, I think probably this evening. But having knocked on doors in North Shropshire, it's not just us that the Tories are losing votes to. It's also the Kippers, it's Reform, it's people, it's the...
But you dig into the Tory results.
Yeah,
that's right.
The Tories or the people who were Tory councillors have not come to us in North Shropshire. They've gone somewhere else. They've gone to Reclaim and Reform or just cranky with the world.
When you dig into those polling results, half the Tory vote is going to don't know. So they might still stay Tory, but I think there's a lot of chat out there that they just won't vote. And I think what we're going to see in North Shropshire, and again, if people are watching this after, I might be completely wrong, I think we're going to see a really drop in the amount of Tory vote out there. Even if we don't quite get across the line, I think the Tory vote, and you saw it a little bit in, Broken Shire's by-election that they had a week or so.
Bexley.
Yeah, that's right. The Labour didn't massively increase, but the Tory vote collapsed.
So the biggest response I've had on doorstep in North Shropshire so far, and I've canvassed 3 times, has been, I always vote Tory, but. And there's been a different thing after the but every time. But, they had 2/3 of the vote. They used to weigh it in that part of the world. And so most people who you knock on a door have voted Tory in the past. So that's the normal response. And some of them are, I'm still Conservative, that's fine. But very few. I've always voted Tory, but I'm not sure about this chap from Birmingham, but I'm not sure about all of this house partying, but I'm not sure that, one rule for them, one rule for us. And it's that but that I think might be the sign that the high tide has been...
I know.
has gone.
I should have gave her a radio mic just I had a spare port. We should have just given Hannah one.
Give Hannah a platform.
We've given her wine.
Yeah,
what have we done?
Yeah.
More wine.
Can we just take a moment as well, just to say a massive thank you to our candidate in Old Bexley and Sidcup?
Yeah.
I think, yes,
absolutely.
is it Simone? I thought it was Simone. Simone it is, you know, it can be, I put this on my Twitter, it can be an absolutely thankless task being a Liberal Democrat candidate in a, you know, let's be honest.
We're not targeting.
Yeah, in a place we're not targeting, and particularly when the party's attention is elsewhere, you know, rightly so. But, you know, I know she stood for us in the general election in 2019. She put herself out there. She stood again. She knew she wasn't going to get a huge amount of party resources, but she was still out there delivering leaflets, knocking on doors, and, you know, fundamentally, she gave people the opportunity to vote Liberal Democrat, and that is democracy. Yeah. That is what is important.
And I remember Richard Kemp saying to us, actually, he was talking. I remember
Where is Richard Kemp?
He double booked himself. You know, he's a CBE. I think he's felt really threatened by Josh getting an OBE that now Commander Kemp doesn't want to come out unless we give him like a royal salute or something like that. But Richard said he goes to more by-elections where like the by-election where it's not fully focused, where we're not going to win. Just give those candidates and stuff to say we really appreciate what you do, because I've done my share of paper candidate stuff. When you're not the focus and you've got to just. It can feel like particularly when you get, like say, the Progressive Alliance people saying, "Oh, why are you even doing it?" It's not great.
Yeah. I was going to say, are those elections like really look like non-winnables before Richard goes? Is that
wow. Poor guy. but yes. But Sam, so what are your thoughts?
Well, in terms of that sort of where the Conservative vote is disappearing off to, and it kind of going possibly over to Don't Vote or Reform or whoever that is, what is interesting is how much of that Conservative vote is former Labour vote.
Yeah.
Because there was a big switch of people who'd never voted Conservative before, were long-time Labour voters, switched to Conservatives over the last 2 elections, really, and then what are they associating with? Where are their values? And they're probably not our values, because if they were Labour going to Conservative, that was probably authoritarian type voters.
So what does that mean then? So is that because I think this might be being a bit cruel to some of the Conservative candidates, but I don't really care. So the North East Durham guy, Richard Holden, stood in Preston. He probably wasn't massively invested in North East Durham before he actually got elected there because of what happened in 2019. Do we think the Tories are going to suddenly lose a lot of those seats? What's going to I really don't know what's going to happen to us, because it doesn't like Labour are doing much to win them back. And if the Tories aren't good enough to hold them, and this is my worry, so I'm going to use the Burnley example, where Labour took it for granted. There was no one really going to take that vote off Labour, and the BNP turned up. If Labour aren't coming back, Tories' government is a complete shower. What happens to those voters?
So I think it goes back to my point about the turning up and listening to what people are saying. So I remember also, to use a Burnley example, I think there was back in the day when I was an organiser in Liverpool, I went to a training session with and it was Hilary Stevenson that was running it. And I thought you may have.
She's awful, I've heard.
Wonderful.
She's absolutely.
Hillary's Lisa's mother-in-law.
Yeah. And also kind of like the power in Stockport. So like let's be kind of like very polite about Hillary, please. So I've lost where I am. No, so the Burnley thing. So we had the Labour, absolutely right. Labour had completely taken the area for granted. The BNP sadly turned up, and rather than wait for the council to clear up some graffiti or something, they would go in and actually scrub the walls themselves. And then to beat them, we would do the same thing. We would turn up, do the community politics, actually listen to what people cared about, and so I think that's the opportunity here. Is, let's be honest, there's a difference between a by-election and a general election. But if we're going to win the target seats that we've got at a parliamentary level, it's really important that all our candidates are going out, knocking on doors, finding out what the issue is. It might be GP surgeries, it might be traffic, it might be that a train station's needed. I'm just literally talking about Cheadle now, aren't I? But they are those. But if you can be the person that's got a message to be talking about those things, and whilst the Conservatives are managing parties or whatever in Downing Street, and the Labour Party are being a bit quiet and not really knowing what they're doing, that's our opportunity there to actually campaign on what people care about.
And I suppose that kind of leads on, sorry Sam, before you come in, is, again, we're not going to talk too much about Morecambe, but the Morecambe Lib Dems are very, very small. They're a tiny party. And they saw that Labour weren't doing anything, so they started thinking, all right, maybe I can get onto the town council, and then maybe we can take on this. And it was you don't have to think, when you look at, and it's very easy, because again, I'm in a fairly smallish party, so is Hannah, so is Sam, and we look at Stockport and thought, oh God, wouldn't it be lovely to have 26 councillors? This is where Lisa goes, is it? But actually, it's small steps, you know, it's amazing how you've got to make that first step towards changing something, and it's amazing what you can do.
I think it's really important that we disassociate ourselves from the idea of all politicians are the same. Yeah. Because at the moment, the hardest thing for me, so I'm in a four-way facing ward where we've got a very right-wing kind of former UKIP group, Conservative Labour, and the right-wing kind of other, they're able to campaign on all politicians are the same. Yeah. And I think this is where the community politics thing that Tom was talking in about, really taking up people's concerns and showing that you're connected to them, is going back to us saying we are the people that you can trust. There's a huge trust issue in British politics at the moment, and we are suffering from that, and that's more than any specific policy to do with the coalition. We lost trust because we said we would do one thing and we did something else. I don't know. For bringing up the coalition, that's
absolutely
fine.
Okay. I think maybe a shot.
Next round is on.
Yeah. I think, fundamentally for us, we have to do things the slow way and the long way round. And the only way we can do that is working away at grassroots level, working away at community level. I know Stockport, where we have two Stockport target seat parliamentary candidates here, have got council elections this year and then all up to the year after. And so it's likely that there will be, a significant round of council elections in Stockport before that general election. And our performance in those council elections matters so much. Yeah. It matters so much. In a way, it doesn't matter for Labour and the Conservatives, because it's the credibility that it gives us, and that that kind of groundwork. And in terms of getting back to what you were saying about those red wall seats that turn blue, I think the thing to remember is that the Tories are not going to fight in the general election with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I think that's extremely obvious.
Is that what we think?
Yeah, definitely.
He's a liability now. Yeah. He's a liability. The only question now is, it's not if, it's when. Yeah, it is. It will be timing for them, but they are not going to fight another general election. I mean, there are a whole myriad of worse options than Boris Johnson, but there's always that.
It's Liz Truss or Richie, isn't it? That are going to be the two.
But there's always that novelty, and and I think the thing to remember as well is, when because obviously I live in one of these red wall seats that has turned blue. They are pork barreling the hell out of these places, and and they're not stupid about it. They are targeting their this town's funding, this levelling up fund. They are targeting it to those places where they know those Labour voters switch to Tory, and they need to hold them. But that's why we worked so hard at this by-election in Rotherham, because that is in one of those seats.
So there was a reason, I think. So I listened to what Sam was saying about trust in politics, and I wanted to say something about how we combat that, because he's absolutely right. There's a real danger that everybody tars everybody with the same brush and goes, well, you're all as bad as one another, you're all pigs in a trough. And I think the way we combat that, or the evidence suggests the way we combat that, is for people to know us. And you do that by knocking on people's doors and getting stuff done. And you also do it by empowering community. And I'm just going to go on a brief community politics round, if you'll allow me, which is that we are great at what we do when we empower our communities to do stuff for themselves. It's not about doing things to people because we've got the right answers. We thought about it and we think socialism is the answer, and therefore we're going to do socialism to this estate because that's what's good for them. And that isn't the answer at all. It's about empowering communities to do things for themselves. And if people know us and go, I can go to them with a problem and they'll point me in the right direction, or they'll help me sort it out myself, or we want a park for our estate, Lisa will help us sort out a park for our estate, or Sam will help us sort out this problem we've got with ASB, and that's how we do stuff. And community politics is the answer, is the way we combat these dreadfully bigoted, right-wing people who are spreading misinformation, disinformation online in a way that's unhealthy, and it often comes along with bigoted views about the world and about the world we live
But they
in.
thrive in vacuums. That's the point.
And the
isn't
way
it?
we do that is with that human contact,
Yeah.
by knocking on doors, working with communities, being part of that community and getting stuff done.
Before we go any further, we want to give a quick shout out to our fantastic, not only our Patreon subscribers, who we really appreciate. They keep. I don't pay any of these guys. Nothing. I brought
We
them
would
all
pay
the way
John
over.
to rant
I mean,
on
I
microphone
might
for
get
hour
them-
after
I
hour.
might get them. In fact, how much was that bottle of wine? I'm just joking, but no, we really appreciate everyone who subscribes to the Patreon account. It's very good. We also want to give a huge shout out to Prater Rains, who have sponsored this podcast now for, I think, a year and a half, 2 years. And so if you want a fantastic, brilliant website run by Lib Dems who can really help you get everything you want from a website, do check out Prater Rains as well. But now we'll go back to the podcast. Okay, do we want to talk about greens? In fact, actually, I want to bring that up, and then I'm going to give my wine glass to Lisa. Just kind of nudge that towards you. So, Sam, do we care about the Greens? Are the Greens? Because I still don't. I think the Greens. Nobody expects Greens to win another MP. In fact, Caroline Lucas might lose her seat. Well, maybe that's hopeful thinking, is it? I don't know. Do we think? I mean, you look at Brighton; it's a complete mess, literally.
She survived that before, though.
The only place they're competing is somewhere like Bristol, where they're fighting the Labour Party. And I think they're not fighting the Tories anywhere seriously. Because of the way our electoral system works, it's first past the post, you have to get into a position where you can say we're the credible option other than the ones who are in at the moment.
Do you think this is the Greens' only chance though? Because they had a polling bump. They're now loitering around the 9% sort of mark, sometimes going slightly above it. But it's very easy for lazy commentators to say, oh yeah, the Greens must be resurgent. They've got 400 councillors, we've got 2,500. You know, their power base is so much lower that they can't capitalise. And I think that's what we're talking about. Lisa and Tom, with all my heart, you are going to win those next parliamentary seats when you are up, only because of the base we've built over the years in that area. You can't just... nowhere's going to win with one councillor and you're going to get the MP. I don't care who you are, you're not going to do it.
Unless you're the Tories.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Actually, yeah. And it goes back to Burnley. The Tories had virtually no MP and had no councillors, and now they have an MP.
I think, well, one of the things was just mentioned was Bristol.
Yeah.
And Bristol is stronger for the Greens because of what happened in terms of us stepping back.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to know that, you know, we are suffering badly because of what happened there. And if you speak to people in Bristol, they're quite angry about it.
Yeah.
And fair enough.
It's devastating.
Yeah. I also think we're all very, very political. Name a Green politician outside of Caroline Lucas.
I can actually remember
Nanny Bennett.
Sharpberry?
both.
Oh, no, yeah, Sharpberry,
Who are the two? Who are the two Lib Dem? Who are the two Green leaders at the moment?
I couldn't tell you, but I'll tell you what, it was interesting. I was chatting to a Green member the other day, and I went, "Who are you two leaders now?" And she went, "I've no idea." Right, so yeah, I think that sums it up, doesn't it?
Sorry. I think the Greens suffer from this even more badly than we do. I mean, fundamentally, politics is a duopoly. You know, that's what first past the post reinforces. It's Labour versus the Conservatives. We suffer from that. You know, UKIP suffer from that as well. Brexit Party. You know, they've all, you know, polled massive chunks of vote share and had absolutely nothing to show for it. You know, because of that. Just because we don't like their politics doesn't mean we think that that's necessarily fair. To be honest. The Greens suffer from that they suffer from that even worse than us. I remember Tom saying people trust us with their potholes, but they don't trust us with their parliamentary seats. Now, I don't...
She listens to one of our podcasts.
Of course I do.
Listens to me.
I think people don't even trust the Greens with their potholes.
No.
Yeah? Because their record in local government is absolutely atrocious.
And I should point out, I'm mentioning Morecambe so often. Like last time, every time I mention Morecambe now, I do a shot. That's the kind of... But the Morecambe Lib Dems realised that the Greens because Morecambe's part of Lancaster and Morecambe Council, and the Greens have a foothold in urban Lancaster.
Yeah.
You know, quite affluent, quite nice kind of area.
Champion
Yeah, exactly.
socialists.
And so the Greens put a lot of effort into this by-election they just had for the city council seat, and they said we cannot let them get a foothold in Morecambe as well, because we might never get. I think I referred to the Greens as like a tick once they've arrived, and I think people were angry at me that I did that. But I think that's the thing. Once they dig in,
yeah, and I think we cannot say too often the Greens are illiberal, authoritarian, economically incompetent transphobes. You know, I just don't think we can say. I don't think we can say that too often.
Wannabe Corbynites as well.
Yeah, I don't think we can say that too often. You know, they do not share our values. But I think that they will, you know, we use our local government success to get ourselves a foothold, you know, at parliamentary level. They have no local government success. You know, the last time they were on Brighton Council, it ended up bottom of the league tables recycling. I believe they've got it back, have they? And they're making a bit of a pig's ear of it again, is that?
So I don't know where, sadly, my knowledge of the council recycling league tables is lacking, Hannah. And so
You let yourself down,
I've let the school down. Three of the top four. I think you'll find, Sam, 4 of the top 4.
Yeah, that's right.
Councils. However, so I agree a lot with what Hannah said about how we're different political parties. We have fundamentally different values in all sorts of ways. There are, though, reasons why we can work together after an election. So if after an election the voters have decided who their councillors are, and we have not, as politicians, in some back room, come up with a deal in a smoke-filled room as to who, well, these people are allowed to choose from this list, and those people are allowed to choose from this list, then the voters decide who their councillors are. We've given them a proper choice. We can agree with the Greens that we are facing an existential threat for our planet on climate change. We absolutely agree on that. We also agree that the voting system we have is a farce, and it makes politics so much worse than it needs to be, and we just need to look at almost every other European country to see how politics can be better than the politics we have here. So we agree with the Greens that we need voting reform and politics need to be better than it is. But we are different parties. I want to get Liberal Democrats elected. I really, really do. I think this country deserves more Liberal Democrat representation. Liberalism is the answer to so many of the challenges we face as a country, as a world, and getting more Green councillors, getting more Green MPs is not the answer to that.
No, it's not. And I think the thing as well is, fundamentally, if you support proportional representation, you support coalitions.
Yeah.
And you support, you know, not at the election stage, as Lisa said, democracy is where people get a full choice to vote for. But what all comes out in the wash of that is that, you know, and if you look at local governments around the country, there are all sorts of alliances and coalitions.
Yeah.
You know, there's Labour and Greens, there's, you know, Liberal Democrats and Tories,
Tories propping up Labour and
Tories propping up
Tories.
Labour. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that is absolutely fine, because, you know, when push comes to shove, we're all in politics to make things better for people. And I think as long as people are given a good range of choice at the elections, you cannot support fair votes and you cannot support proportional representation if you are not then willing to work as a team with whatever comes out in the wash, which, let's be honest, is why the Labour Party do not support proportional representation.
And people look at the result in Germany, where they go, oh my God, wouldn't that be wonderful? The Liberals, the Greens, and the SDP. No, the SDP. Sorry. Anyway, whatever. The socialisty kind of people, the Liberals.
Oh, sorry, the Liberals, the Greens. Sorry.
So that go and go, oh my word, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful? But they don't fight together on the same ticket. I mean, actually, the FDP, which is our sister party, is probably very dissimilar to the Lib Dems. They're not actually particularly close to our idea. They're very, very on the right, centre right of economic liberalism. But the fact they've got together and then they make it work afterwards, because the alternative was, you know, more of the same kind of thing. And I think it's so simplistic. And I listened to another podcast today talking about, you know, Labour just needs to work with the Lib Dems, and then it'll be, you know, voters aren't stupid. They're not stupid.
So on the
we're not going to talk all night.
But on the progressives need to work together. I think if there is another party out there that is progressive, aside from the Liberal Democrats, I'm still to be introduced to them. Is the first thing I'd say on that. The second thing is, stepping down is not the same as targeting your resources sensibly.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware that I'm standing here with the microphone and I'm pointing at you, John, and my hand's out, and that's saying that I feel very strongly about it. So I'm going to put my hand away. So
I've helped you today. I've been out campaigning for you today. I have targeted my resource.
You delivered Christmas cards in the drizzle, and I did. Thank you for it.
Warrior is what you meant to say. Warrior.
My point there, though, was that targeting your resources, so stand a candidate everywhere, we should absolutely listen to ALDC when they say always stand a candidate. But target your resources where it makes sense.
Yeah.
We don't need 200 really good seconds.
Yeah.
That's not what we need in first past the post. It's not what we need.
And I'm gonna let Tom come in a second, but I'm not like bigging myself. I made a conscious decision that I would love to be an MP. I would absolutely love it.
Bloody great job.
Yeah, you'd be great.
The likelihood of me doing it where I live is slim. You know, I've taken on Ben Wallace the last couple of years. I knew I wasn't going to win. I just enjoyed it. I thought it was quite a good thing. So I have already decided that every month I will go to my nearest target seats and campaign. I've been to Tom's, I've been to yours. This is what I can do, because it's not that I'm giving up on Preston. Of course not. I want my town and my city to be a better place, a more liberal place. But I've got to target what effort and time I have into and if you two get elected, that could spur on then more Lib Dems getting elected in the Northwest. And sometimes we have to be a little bit conscious of the fact that the world doesn't revolve around us. And that can be very difficult sometimes for parliamentary candidates. But I know on polling day, I will probably be in Stockport helping you two get elected. And that's what I would do.
Just to be really clear, John.
Well,
You're really welcome in Hazel Grove.
I did Hazel Grove last time, and it rained. So this time, I think it's
And it never rains. It never rains in Cheadle. It never rains in Cheadle. That is fact.
You lot could toss a coin, or I don't know.
I've been
It's
to Cheadle on polling day and got really,
It's
really
7 till
really
10,
rained
isn't it?
on.
So you can do like 9 p.m. till 10 p.m. in Hazel Grove. And then you can do the rest of the day.
Mornings in Cheadle.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But no, it is interesting where the Lib Dem. But I'm feeling fairly optimistic as we end this year. I mean, we can't not talk about what's happening within the government. It has been just. It's almost everything we've thought. Don't they know they're an utter bunch of clowns? Coming to fruition, really. And I mean, it comes something when Dominic Raab, who is, let's face it, has two law degrees and not a clue, refuses to go onto the morning television shows to defend it. And he would go out, he would defend anything generally. That's how bad it's got. Sam, Tom, what are your thoughts on what this last few weeks have been like?
I've got a bit of a contrary view on this. I think we should all feel a bit sorry for Boris Johnson on this.
Go on.
Okay. Comment below.
So I defy anyone to say that they would not deny a party was held in your house if you weren't invited. So that's why I think we need to be a bit
you
fair.
think he's been jilted?
It's clearly there's a good gaff there. Let's have a party, not invite him. I think that's what's happened there. No, seriously, I think it is. Let's just think. Like, obviously, we're talking about what's happening at the moment. In terms of COVID, in terms of the party and stuff. But let's go back to the beginning of the year as well, where women who were going out protesting about the way they were treated and the police were treating them.
Sarah Everard.
Exactly, Sarah Everard. And the just silence from the Conservatives. That seems like 2 years ago. Yeah. It was this year. Was it
really this year?
Yeah, it was this year, yeah.
Crikey.
And we're thinking about this has just been a sustained effort of the Conservatives dropping the ball time and time and time again. And what's now is quite interesting is, and I think we've talked about this previously, is that originally it wasn't cutting through, but now it is. It definitely is. It's just like, oh, they've messed this one up as well. And that's what's starting to happen. And interestingly, I'm now getting emails from people saying, why is my MP doing this? Why is my MP doing this? Or why are the Conservatives doing this? And what do the Liberal Democrats believe in this? And I think it's now cutting.
Not
Anti
taking the
talking about it
is what Lib Dem believe in.
Yeah.
So hang on, Samson went to come in.
Well, we talked before. We talked about hello Conservative Party headquarters.
Hi.
Well, we had a little thing. We had a little thing with Josh where we said now they can't. Now that Conservative HQ can't go to Christmas parties, they could have more time to listen to the podcast. A nice wholesome thing you can do. You can do it with wine and cheese. We shouldn't make wine and cheese the enemy. No.
We should never make wine and cheese.
Well, we talked earlier in the year, I can't remember exactly when, about there almost seems to be a thing. So there's all these things falling by the wayside, but then there suddenly seem to be like little tactical things, and people were like, are they actually playing this really cleverly? You know, there's ways in which they're shaping this. You know, they seem to drop the ball on how our relationship with Europe was working, and then they kind of played it as, oh no, this was always meant to be the case. This is us. This is, we meant this to happen, and this is what's happening. And how could you not
the economy.
Exactly? And and we were kind of like, is there somebody really clever doing stuff? And it just no. Because if there was, then it wouldn't have run out of steam.
They're just rubbish.
They really are terrible, and they're consistently proving they're terrible. And talking to people at Parliament, you know, I'm reasonably lucky to get to meet parliamentarians on a regular basis, and I've spoken to Conservative lords who've said the same thing, where they just go, these people are not competent on any level, and that's their own side saying it.
They want to make it. It's weird. This kind of obviously. I mean, the most obvious one is picking a fight with France. Could you get anything more culture war-y than the things? They're taking our fishing boats. You know, that kind of. They want that fight, and we've actually gone through nearly 40 minutes of podcast without mentioning Brexit. But the Tories would love everything to be on Brexit going forward, even though what's happening is. Obviously, we know. I mean, announced. I think was it this morning? Today's been a long day. The economy's slowed to just 0.1%. So we know there's massive issues going on, partly related to Brexit. But the Tories will use that as a foil. So what? How do we play that?
Can I just say, I think maybe you're right. The Tories do want everything to be about Brexit, but I don't think it plays as well now.
No.
Because we've got the fishing sector has basically gone. This is terrible. This is a really
sector,
and what we've seen in Shropshire, where farmers are putting up Lib Dem posters on all their land. It's actually the staple of the Conservatives were based on. Fishing industry and the farmers' unions, and now suddenly they're going, no, this is rubbish.
So do we think that? Let's talk about a little bit. What's next year coming? I think Hannah, actually, do you want to come in on these other points before I think about what we're looking forward to next year?
Yeah. So just before we move on to that, I think the difference that's happened in these last few weeks is all of a sudden it's personal for people.
Yeah.
So I think things like, you know, Brexit. You know, it's. I've always sort of said, you know, people aren't going to be bothered about it until it hits them in the wallets, until it hits them personally. It's always felt like something quite removed. Brussels is removed, isn't it? You know, politicians are removed. But when people are thinking, do you know what? I cancelled my Christmas. I didn't see my grandma at Christmas last year, and then she died in January. We cancelled our works Christmas party. We didn't get to spend time together as a family. You know, I was speaking to Penny Baker today, who's a councillor in Sheffield, and she was telling me that she was spending an hour with her eldest daughter this year. She hasn't seen her in person for 2 years. And all these people who had made those personal sacrifices last Christmas because that was the advice from this government that they trusted. You know, because in a global pandemic, you have to trust the advice coming out of your government, because what else have you got? And they were making those decisions not to break the rules, not to see their family, not to spend time with their loved ones. And, you know, the Downing Street massive were partying, maskless, behind their backs.
Betrayal is one of the biggest, and we know it. You were talking about coalition times. It wasn't so much the tuition fees policy; it was the sense of betrayal that really hit. And
I think
that's
a shot for John there. Just if anybody.
So, but it's such a wrong one. They can excuse Boris being a clown. They can excuse the vaccine, the pandemic's being very difficult. Have you just used a Labour line?
It might be a Labour line, but if it is, it's from a focus group that they've used in the last couple of weeks. But it's quite a good one, so we'll say it again. We, the Find the Buzz, did not find it funny, and I suspect most of the people listening to this podcast did not find it funny at any point along the way, but it's certainly not funny any longer. And I think Hannah's absolutely right about the number of people who have had a bit of a shock this week, that it's got deeply personal all these last couple of weeks, that they kind of are just busy living their lives, you know, putting 2 matching socks on their kids before they get them out to school in the morning, that kind of thing. And then this week it's kind of smacked them around the face because it's deeply personal, and it is just showing how it's being taken for granted. One rule for you, no rules for us.
And I think
they're laughing at
it was that. I mean, the kind of the running joke in my family is that the media, like the Daily Mail, was always a big attack around this time of year would be like, it's some kind of progressive cause is cancelling Christmas. It's because like someone's done a Christmas card in the wrong way or something. And actually, the irony is the Tories cancelled Christmas.
Yeah.
But at that time, there was a kind of a reasonable part of the public that would just like, okay, this is being handled badly, but COVID is, it's just something we're all going to have to suck up. And now it's like, well, what? Hang on, and it's those people in the kind of the Marples and in Cheadle, it would be like in Bramall, who they generally vote Conservative because it's kind of seen as the right thing to do, isn't it? It's that kind of thing. But actually, they look at it and go, this is a shower. Yeah. Like you've lied to us. You're now taking the mick out of us, and there is hypocrisy. And actually, Conservative voters do not like hypocrisy. They do not like hypocrisy.
There's a real absence of decency.
And
there's a real. I'm trying to think of other words to describe
Conservative values, Lisa. It's proper Conservative values of respecting the rule of law, respecting parliamentary democracy. Just being honest and straightforward,
and honourable,
fundamental Conservative values. And I think there's a lot of kind of particularly in these sort of red wall seats, there's a lot of new Tories, so people who have voted Labour all their lives and have now switched. But the people that I call proper Tories, people with real, deeply embedded, proper Conservative values, they absolutely despise Boris Johnson for the charlatan he is.
Well, it's not even 6 months ago. Not even 6 months ago. Actually, much less. The Queen was sat on her own at the funeral of her husband, and the Tories were having Christmas parties. That says everything you need to know about
and
this.
I don't often praise Keir Starmer, but in Prime Minister's Questions last week, as we're recording it, he did the perfect build-up. He gave like a personal story, someone that couldn't say goodbye to their mother who died. Then he gave the wider context is 500 odd people, or 400 and something odd people died that day, they were having a party. I then mentioned the Queen, and it was almost like the perfect progression of how you can hit home that kind of the callousness of it. And then people have gone about, the focus on the video. The video wasn't the problem. The fact Allegra Stratton was caught joking about it, she probably absolutely mortified about. But actually, that wasn't the issue. It was the hypocrisy. That was the issue. People were cancelling Christmas left, right, and centre. I think everyone in the Northwest, and maybe we were quite lucky that I could still have family come over for Christmas. But
not stay over.
Not stay over, that's right. But there were people in London, a week to go, that's it, you are on your own, and it was devastating to people, and it's the hypocrisy that gets you.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on. 2021 is coming to an end, hopefully with a North Shropshire by-election win. This is what we're hoping.
If enough people get there.
Enough people get there. So does that mean I have to edit this really quickly? It does mean I have to edit this really quickly.
But not tomorrow, because you'll be in North Shropshire.
I am in North Shropshire tomorrow. That's what.
Do it when you get in tomorrow evening.
Yes. Okay. All right.
I'll let you.
All right, ma'am. All right. So, what does 2022 hold for you guys? What? We'll start with Tom because you got the mic because you're not going to get it off Hannah again. Yeah. So what does 2022 hold for the Lib Dems, for Labour, for Tories? Give us your preview of the year.
So I think we've got big local elections in Stockport, so that's going to be. I think that's always elections. So I think that's a kind of I know it's me and Lisa's attention is basically on making them a success for the night. I think the interesting thing for us is I think there are going to be more by-elections, probably not parliamentary ones, but council by-elections, and we've got to show that actually that community politics works. It's really this can't just be a little bubble that we're in. It's got to happen across the country. In terms of Labour, I think they're weirdly a bit contradictory to what I've just said, but I think do the right thing, keep your head down, make sure that you're ready to pounce when needed, kind of get it's clearly something's happening because they're ahead in the polls now, but also I think the Conservatives, I'm going to put the prediction in, this time next year Boris Johnson won't be the Conservative leader.
And you know what's interesting about that, just before we go into Lisa, who's also got a microphone, because I was quite worried about the general election, the next general election, that Boris would bumble along, and then just before the election he would quit. The next person, whether that's Liz Truss or Rishi, comes in, and they get a honeymoon period.
Well,
that takes over.
Can I just?
So I would, if Boris goes before New Year, that honeymoon period will be gone before the next general election.
And before the locals.
And before the locals.
I'll just come in on that before Lisa comes in. I think that is what we've got to get used to, because I think the Conservatives have found a tactic now, which is get a new leader in, and you can forget that. I mean, they've been in power for 11 years. Yeah. So, but no one thinks about that, because
it's always a new government.
It's
it?
Theresa May's Conservatives. It's the Boris Johnson Conservatives. It could be the Rishi Sunak Conservatives, and they rebrand. They are so good at rebranding the whole party and almost going, no, that wasn't us. This is. So I think it's something we've got to be prepared for and find ways, because honestly, I don't think it's really hard for us to kind of go, yeah, but they did this and they did this, because there's a whole new brand, there's a whole new message, and they bring people with that. So we've got to get smarter at beating them on that.
Okay, Lisa, what's your kind of preview for next year?
Preview for next year, looking forward to local elections, so 2022 elections, so those places that were up in England in 2018, so we've got some of the London boroughs, it's all up in London, so we run some of those London boroughs at the moment, and I would be really pleased if we run as many after the local elections. We've got quite a lot of black holes in London, so I want to see some Lib Dems elected in some of those black holes. We've got all-ups in Scotland and Wales, of course, for local elections. And Hannah's having some deep breathing exercises next to me, just at the thought of that. So there's I'd really like to see some progress in some of those places. Of course, they use different election counting systems there. So it's slightly harder to predict how things are going when you go to the 6th round of counting to see who's going to be elected, but that's going to be really interesting. Tom's right, the Mets, as always, we have elections. We don't have all-ups till 2023, but I think there are some places that have got all-ups.
Yeah.
So, and Bury, I think, maybe as well,
that's right, yeah.
which closer to us, and I think we've got some places on completely new council, so local government reorganisation, like Cumbria. I think Somerset also has new ones.
Northampton?
North Yorkshire, but not with York. So York is continuing as a unitary. So there will be life outside local elections as well, but I'm aware I've given an entirely local election focused comment. I agree with Tom. I think I've said for a little while that I didn't think Boris Johnson would see them into the next general election, and I think partly because it's actually quite hard governing. You can campaign in poetry and you govern in prose is the dreadful cliche, but I think it's true that it's genuinely quite hard to get stuff done when you're running stuff, and he just looks a bit bored and knackered, doesn't he? So it's not as exciting maybe as he always wanted to be Prime Minister, or to get to be Prime Minister, not to do the job of being Prime Minister, because they are actually different things. So I don't think he'll be Prime Minister at the end of next year. I do think that we'll move forwards in a good number of places in our local elections. I think we're targeting properly, I think we're gearing up well, and I really hope that there'll be more big parts of the country painted in that lovely Lib Dem gold.
Hannah?
Yes, so on a personal level, I'm up for re-election next May.
Right.
That's quite a big deal for Barnsley, because this is the first time we've defended the seats. So we've been, entirely gain focused up to now. So yes, that does feel like quite a big deal, to be honest. So that I think Lisa's absolutely right to put the focus on local elections, because let's be clear, as Liberal Democrats, we cannot focus exclusively on parliamentary elections. We have to put the groundwork in at the locals. And so, I guess my message to anyone who is listening who does not have local elections in their local area but wants to see more Lib Dems elected, you need to travel. As Lee says, big all-ups in London, massive all-ups in Wales, and also Scotland, which is that's a seriously big deal, electing on that kind of scale. But the question for me is about timing. When will Johnson go? He's going, it's without a doubt. Will he go before the locals? When do the Tories want that bounce? When do they want that bounce?
And do they wait for the boundary changes?
There's lots of questions, lots of uncertainties, but regardless, we need to just throw everything we've got at those local elections. We know we can beat the Tories. We know we can take votes off Labour in their heartlands. That's certainly what I'm looking to do. We're looking in Barnsley to hold my seat, make a couple more gains from Labour, because I just really love beating Labour in Barnsley. It's what gives me life.
Into your veins.
Oh, I just love it.
It does look so motivational though.
I just love it. It's so motivational. And big local actions as well in Sheffield, where again we have a lot of defences. We're going to need to stretch our legs a little bit in order to make some gains. Because remember, the council in Sheffield is in their overall control. So if we want to take control of that, we're going to have to stretch our legs and go in towards we've not really worked before. Yeah, it's massive.
That's there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just literally on the cusp. And, you know, obviously we're, you know, at the moment we're in the middle of the selection process for the Sheffield Hallam candidate, which, as things stand, is the only target parliamentary seat in the whole of Yorkshire and Humber. So it is absolutely crucial that we get a good result in Sheffield, all of South Yorkshire next May, in order to give us that bounce and momentum to tackle that at the next general.
So Hannah's talking about locals, and she's absolutely right. She also mentioned target parliamentary seat. We need to concentrate on local elections in target parliamentary seats, because we know as Liberal Democrats,
But also in Barnsley. Just to be clear.
so wherever else people are campaigning, the answer is but also in Barnsley. We know that we only win outside by-elections where it's different and we're able to make the climate for ourselves. We only win when we've got a strong local government base, and so we need to get that momentum going in the right direction. We've got a number of seats that became target seats in 2019 where they don't have that strong local government base. This is a cracking opportunity for them to get some brilliant Lib Dem councillors elected, Liberal voice on the council, making that case week in, week out. And it's really important that, yes, we fight the fight, but we target where we're fighting that fight in the places where we can have the most impact.
Yeah. I'm interested, before I bring Sam in, not one of us has mentioned Northern Ireland yet. Huge elections in Northern Ireland which could actually shape the whole makeup of this country, of Great Britain. And actually that is really interesting about, am I right? It is not
the UK.
I think that's potentially worthy of a podcast episode in itself,
Yeah.
Tom. Because it's not something I can claim to know.
No, and we've had
honest.
We've had Naomi Long, we've had Stephen Ferry on the podcast as well. We've had an Irish senator on the podcast as well. We've had lots of kind of people input about what's going to happen. And if we've talked about a little bit about Brexit. The big sticking point that no one's figured out is what they do about Northern Ireland, and that's still the problem now.
It was almost, why didn't anyone raise this before?
Yeah, it's really no.
Why didn't anyone raise this?
Sarcasm from you. It's completely out of character, but I could just hear it sneaking through.
Sam, you are an expert on messaging. You understand things going forward. What are you thinking about 2022? Other than Barnsley being important,
yes,
clearly,
it is the crux on which everything will turn. Interestingly, on Northern Ireland, I saw some polling today which had the alliance on as many as 6 seats in after a next general election. That's the sort of high end, but still, that's not been realistic for a long time, and that would make a significant difference.
Yeah.
In terms of messaging, we've been talking about how the Conservatives have, it has now cut through to the public, and it is that thing in terms of messaging. You can't sell a dead horse. You have to have that. You have to have the right thing to sell. You have to have that connection to the people you're talking to. And what's just happened in the last couple of weeks is suddenly people are thinking about the things where we've been saying these things for ages, but it's not been connecting with people, and suddenly people are just thinking slightly differently, and it's affecting them in a different way, and suddenly us saying the same thing that's gone nowhere for ages is connecting to people. So I think seeing how the Conservatives and how that carries on, you said we'd maybe sort of parliamentary by-elections. There are a couple of parliamentary by-elections which could be, without going into the details of the specific, where there has been kind of either criminal behaviour.
Winchester, Leicester East, there's plenty around, isn't there?
Well done not mentioning this.
I love that. Sam has been so delicate.
Well, it's all public.
I think it would be really interesting with that, because that then puts that real focus on the thing that has cut through.
Yeah.
And that'll be really interesting. And next year as well this is going to be almost the first year. We've got now target seat candidates in place. This is the first time we've probably had target seats and candidates in place without a general election right next to us for 2013 would have been the last time that's happened.
Yeah.
It's almost a decade where we've had enough time to build up to a proper general election. So I think that'll be a really interesting thing. And on a personal level, I'm really, really hopeful that street harassment, public street harassment, so this is a real kind of campaign of mine, and John's council have signed up to it, and there's lots of other councils that have started signing up to it, and the Law Commission this week recommended that the public street harassment should be made a specific crime. And I've been working on this at a local level and a parliamentary level so hard, and I'm so proud of Our Streets Now, who are the campaign that I kind of been working with. And if that becomes a law, like, I couldn't tell you how happy I would be.
Go, Sam.
Sam.
And if I know you're getting a little bit emotional there, Sam, and I know we're going to do a podcast about everything, but you talk about why we do what we do.
Yeah.
It's for things like that, mate. Isn't it? It's, you know, changing sometimes minds and hearts, sometimes one vote at a time, one street at a time, but no, I mean, no, and that's what it's all about. So we'll talk about, I suppose, regarding 2022 for myself, obviously I think it's a little bit of time for Lib Dems, particularly in areas that might have had a bit of a rough time, to kick back. You know, this is a chance for us to build, to grow, get ready. I also want to give listeners and viewers, because people never listen to the sign-off at the end, we have a very special episode coming up in the new year, where again, it was planned for this week, then North Shropshire happened, so we had to postpone it to the new year. We have a podcast with Ed Davey, with Mark Pack, and with Mike Dixon, the Chief Executive.
With Hannah Kitchen, I'm sorry.
You've ruined me punch.
Sorry. You were not leading with the actual news there, John. Come on.
Honestly, you leave the selling to me.
Sorry.
Okay.
Heaven forbid that Lisa steals someone's thunder.
Yeah. And so we have.
I managed to keep my counsel.
Those three leaders of the Lib Dems, we are going to grill. It was going to be a review of the year, but now Hannah can go even harsher and say, okay, what are you doing this year? And we all know, like, the battle-hardened mistress of Barnsley is going to take absolutely no prisoners.
I just really hope they don't hand in their membership cards afterwards.
No, I just hope they don't all file complaints. The complaint system is already busy enough. We don't need those three people going, I'm sorry, that behaviour was outside the member code of
This is
conduct.
borderline defamation. I'm absolutely lovely. I'm so lovely.
But
I will not treat them like I treat Barnsley Labour.
all of them have, like, it's amazing. Out of all the interviews we've done interviews with MPs, with lords, with academics from America, senators from Ireland. We've been everywhere, and the only people that have said, could we just check what's going to be the topic, has been this one with Hannah. That is the only one. But
The words Hannah and Kitchen.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything I wanted to do.
But we want to thank everyone who has supported us over this last year. Like I said, we've done over 50 episodes this year. We treat this as a kind of therapy, as a terms of getting through. But we really appreciate all the lovely comments we get. We've had people who have joined the Lib Dems because they've listened to the podcast. We've had people who have become councillors because of the Lib Dem podcast. We really appreciate everyone who comments on particularly on YouTube and everywhere else. Appreciating what we do, but thank you so much for listening. Do follow all these guys. Oh, Lisa's coming in.
Thank you to John.
Yeah.
He's the only one that knows how to plug anything in.
Yeah.
And he's the only one to edit it to make it sound like we speak in sentences.
Yeah.
So thank you to John.
The podcast would not exist without John.
Yeah,
Let's be very clear about this.
This is where the comment goes, you guys actually edit this? It's actually but no, we appreciate everyone for listening, signing up, and for giving us some money, those people that do on Patreon. We particularly appreciate it. Do get to North Shropshire if you're listening to this before Thursday. Do start thinking about next year's local elections. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We'll be back with loads more episodes. We might even have a North Shropshire reaction podcast later in the week, depending on how it goes. So thank you so much for watching, listening, subscribing, and your support. And we'll be back with another episode very soon. We're off for one more drink. Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas.